Hello everyone. Today we're going to be taking a look at our 48-inch Signature Kitchen dual fuel range. This range it can be quite intimidating at first glance. There's a lot of things about it that are new or different to LG, but at the same time there's a lot of things that are still just similar to a standard oven range. First off, we noticed that the unit has two separate ovens, one 30-inch oven, the other being an 18-inch steam oven. On top of the unit we have a sous vide for sous vide cooking, 4 gas burners, and also an induction cooktop. And today we're going to be looking at disassembling this unit, how to break it down, and how to access the components on it. So we'll start by disassembling, removing the rear cover, and then we'll move on with removing the cooktop. The first thing you want to do when you're doing this is get the burner grates out of the way. Also go ahead and get your burners out of the way as well. So we're going to start off by removing those. Now, to access the back of the unit, it's not necessary to remove the top. Also, to remove the top of the unit, it's not necessary to remove the back. But we're just, for video purposes, we're going to be removing both. But if you have something to service under the front end, whether it be an induction issue or a cooktop PCB issue, you can access that without removing the rear cover. First off, to start with, we've got to get this vent cover off and out of place. To do that, there's 2 screws located in the center here. Of course, you would have to have the burner grates removed to get to these screws or access these screws. Once we have those 2 screws removed, then we can just lift up on this cover and slide it off and out of place. So once we have the vent cover removed, the back cover, the back plate, it's just like any other standard oven. There's nothing special about it. There's 18 screws to hold it in place, but we'll have to come around to the back so we can show that. If the unit has a power cord, or if it's connected, we want to get that removed first to go ahead and get that out of the way. To do that, we have an access panel. We want to get inside here and access our power connections on our terminal block. One tip is to be sure you put the terminal block screws back in place. We don't want to lose those screws. And also the cover. We want to put it back in place because we don't want to be losing anything in the process. Now, with our power cord removed, we're going to want to take the 18 screws. Around the edge, there's 4 in the center. Once we get those screws out, the rear cover will just pull right off. There are 2 hooks on each side that this hooks into, so we just slightly have to lift up and then pull off, and our cover removes. Okay, once our back cover is removed, now we can see we have access to all of our oven components. First thing you want to note is it's just pretty much as if we had a 2 standard ovens. We have our 18-inch oven over here, also our 30-inch on this side. Our 30-inch oven is just a conventional oven. We do have 1 control PCB board and 1 relay PCB board. Both these boards control each oven. You'll also note that there's 3 different low voltage transformers providing our 24 volts, and also our regulator for our cooktop plumbing. On our 18-inch oven, the biggest difference here is this is a steam oven, which incorporates a steam generator. If we look here on the lower right corner, this is where our steam generator is located. There are 2 pumps that pump water to the steam generator, and also will pump water back to our reservoir tank, which is located under the cooktop. One unique thing about this steam generator system is the vent at the top. This is to prevent any siphoning issues. So we don't just siphon the water out of the reservoir tank. We have to be sure that this vent is located above our reservoir tank. From there, basically it's just a standard steam generator. And we'll produce more videos on this later to give us a little bit more idea of how this system works. Okay, so our next step with our 48-inch signature kitchen dual fuel range is disassembling the cooktop. It's a fairly simple process. It's just a step-by-step process that you want to take. One thing we want to make sure we always remember is we work from left to right across this unit. We have our sous vide, our gas cooktop, and our induction cooktop. We want to start by removing our sous vide. If we follow this process, it makes things flow a little simpler. I'll show you the things that I've noticed in taking this apart to make it a little better. I don't want you guys to get intimidated by it because it's still just like taking any other cooktop apart. Nothing really else involved. So first we want to start by removing our sous vide module. To access our sous vide, of course we want to open our door, and then we want to remove our bath for the sous vide. Once we have our sous vide bath removed, then we want to remove the 4 screws in the bottom of our sous vide module. Prior to removing our sous vide module, we want to be sure and put something up here on top to protect the stainless steel and also the black finish on our manifold covers. So just a blanket or some sort of protective cover in place. Because we're going to pick this up and set it over so we can get to our wire connections under the bottom. So from here, it's just simply lifting it up, directly up on it, and set it over so we can access our connections under the bottom. From here we have our connections for our heater to remove. And then there's also a bimetal thermostat. We want to get those 2 connectors off. And then this is a switch for our bath. If the bath is not in place, then our sous vide will not heat. We want to remove that connector as well. With all those wiring connections removed, we can now take our sous vide module and set it to the side. Now our next step is going to be to remove the manifold cover. First thing, there's 2 strips that kind of fill in the gap here. One of these will just come up out of place once we get the sous vide out. Now if we notice, our other piece of stripping is actually just under the edge of the induction cooktop module. This is actually going to prevent us from being able to remove our manifold cover. So what we're going to want to do is get that out of place. Now in order to do that, there are 2 screws, 2 black screws on the side of our induction module. These are actually the screws that hold that module together and in place, but basically all we're wanting to do is separate that module just enough to get this piece of stripping out of here. So with those 2 screws out of place, we can lift up on this induction module, and now we can get our other piece of stripping out of the way. Once we get that stripping out of the way, now we can put our 2 screws back into our induction module so that it can be removed later all as one piece. Now to remove our manifold cover on our cooktop. On our front burners we have 4 screws on each burner. Each manifold has 4 screws. Our rear 2 manifolds has 2 screws each for a total of 12 screws. So we want to get those screws out. One thing also to note on these screws, there's a small rubber washer that goes underneath those screws. That is to prevent any cracking of the porcelain coating on this cover. You want to be sure that those are saved and put back in place to prevent any cracks from taking place on this porcelain. Okay, once we have our 12 screws out of the burner or the manifolds, now we can just lift straight up on this manifold cover and pull it out of place. Now our next step we're going to do is we're going to remove the induction cooktop. To remove this induction cooktop, remember our 2 black screws that are here, we want to be sure that those are back in place because we don't want this to separate as we lift up on the induction cooktop. However, if we look just below those, there are 2 screws that are in place that are actually holding this complete induction cooktop in place. So we're going to remove those 2 silver screws. Okay. Again, we want to use something to protect the edge of this oven when we take this induction cooktop out, because we're going to bring it out and we're going to set it over here on the edge. Yeah, this is going to be really hard to do. So to remove it, basically we just simply want to lift up on one side, on the left side, and pull it toward the center of the range, and then set it up on the edge. The induction module is actually slid and locked in place on 2 tabs on the side of the oven range. So what you're doing is moving it over out of the way and then standing it up. Once we have our induction module pulled up, now you can actually see down inside here, you'll see the PCBs, your control PCB, and the relay PCB for the cooktop. Okay, first thing we need to do is remove our 240 volt connection coming up here to the induction module. It's just simple, one connector. Also, we have our fan connectors and our other control connectors on the front side. Underneath covering our PCBs is a dust shield. Basically, it's just a plastic or mica film cover. We've got to kind of pull it back out of the way, just enough where we can gain access to our control PCB, because there's 2 connectors that actually plug in from our induction cooktop. So basically we want to get down in there to those connectors, disconnect those 2 connectors. With those connectors out of place, we're able to remove the induction cooktop all as one assembly. Okay, now with our induction module out of the unit, we can access pretty much everything. The next step is going to be to remove our 2 shields that are in place that are covering our plumbing and also surrounding our manifolds. Okay, those are held in place by 1 screw on each shield, so we'll just remove those 2 screws. Once we have those 2 screws out of place, then we're just going to lift up on these shields and get them out of the way. Now with these 2 shields out of place, we have access to our burner manifolds, the main manifolds with our valves connected to them, all of our gas plumbing. Also, we have 4 ignition modules. Each burner has its own igniter. We do support reignition on this model. Also, on the back of the unit, you'll notice 2 solenoids. These solenoids are actually here because on our low simmer, we do cycle the flame on and off. So these solenoids are used for our flame cycling. Now our next step is going to be to remove the front display cover with our knobs and everything. To do that, we want to get our knobs out of place first. They're just simply like any other oven. We just pull the knob straight out and remove them. You want to make sure you kind of keep track of which knob goes where in this process. Okay, with our knobs out of place, our next step is going to be to remove the, there's a total of 4 screws on the top, 3 screws on the bottom we want to get out so we can lift up and remove this front cover. Okay, to start to get this cover off, we're going to remove our 4 screws on the top first and then our 3 screws along the bottom edge. Now, we're going to remove this front cover of the oven. One thing I want to note and bring close attention to is if we look down here at our switches and our valves, unlike a traditional oven range with knobs and switches on it, there's a yoke connection that actually has the front control knob connected to the switch and the valve. When we separate that, that knob has to, or that yoke has to actually separate inside there. So to get it to remove first, we want to lift up on this front, and it'll kind of allow the back end or the bottom end to tilt out. And notice how those separate and come out of place. Now our next step is going to be to remove our connectors. These connectors are marked. One thing I want you to make sure and note of, be sure that the connectors are marked prior to removing them, because each one of these 5 connections, they're the exact same connector. So it's kind of hard to tell them apart without being sure they're marked. But basically we just squeeze the tab and pull to remove. So once we get our front control panel off this unit, now we can see that we have access to a few other components. We have our knob control PCB. This is for the outer portion of the knob to detect movement. These outer controls are for adjusting time, temperature, different things. So we have access to those PCBs. Also the connector to the back for our 7-segment display. Notice how our yoke connection mates up. We have access to our display control PCB, the Wi-Fi board, the chimer, the buzzer board. Also, here on the front, we have our brackets and our strips for our LED mood light or night lights. There's also a switch. This switch is for your bridging, for your induction module, and then you have your switch which turns on and off the night lights or mood lights. Everyone, this concludes our basic disassembly of the cooktop and the rear cover of the Signature Kitchen 48-inch dual fuel range. Stay tuned or look for other videos that will come out later showing you how to access other components such as the steam generator, reservoir, and different things. But for now, this is just the basics of getting the cooktop removed and the rear cover removed. Thank you.